Hey everyone, just letting in people in the Zoom. Can someone on the Zoom give me a thumbs up if you can hear us? Great. Hey. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming today in Crestone. It's a little warmer than last time. Just gonna give people a minute to hop in. I think we typically have people joining from all over the world in our Zoom, and happy to have you locals here as well. So this is what we call our Ghatika Monthly gathering, which is a monthly meditation session where we're inviting people into methods of what we call contemplative science, really, which is basically mind training exercises that enable us to really hone the instrument of the mind to help us become better at discerning our own internal wisdom, becoming better in our world. And we do that in a number of ways at the CCR. We are hosting advanced meditators in their own retreats. They're participating in science research, even as they advance in their own meditation practice. And we're also developing ways to share these techniques with the world. So this monthly gathering is one way we like to do that. There will be more coming in the future. So you'll see research coming out, you'll see more education offerings, and we're just happy to be growing this community step by step. So thank you for coming today. If you feel moved to donate or make an offering, we always appreciate that. But as always, the kind of biggest offering you can give is your own practice. So we will do that today. I welcome Doug, our expert teacher, to lead us in taking the mind as the path today. So let's get started.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are listening from. It's morning here in Crestone. And today is the fourth session that I have taught of these Ghatika sessions. Excuse me. And thinking back over the flow of the practices that we have been discussing and practicing over the last 3 months, the first session that I taught was really an introduction to the basic concept of short, frequent sessions and the value of doing those. So this is the advice of shamatha masters in almost every lineage, that the way to approach shamatha is with a balanced mind of stability, relaxation, and clarity. And that the best way to do that in the beginning is with short sessions, because it is very likely that a beginner is not going to be able to set the standard in 24 minutes of balanced mind, of stability, clarity, and relaxation. And so it's very important to just know exactly, with the power of introspection, when is long enough to end a meditation session. So we started with 6 minutes in that first session. And it could be that that still is an appropriate time for you. And the key there, advice, is to quit while you still want to meditate. So don't overdo it. And become hostile to your practice because it's no longer fun when you quit. So it's very, very powerful to do these short, frequent sessions, and they can be as short as a couple of minutes, and frequent, though, is also very helpful. As Lama Allen says, season the day with your meditation practice. So he often says also that when you are practicing, it really is the end of waiting. So when you're used to be waiting in line at the checkout for the grocery store or something like that, that could be feel like wasted time, but no longer, because you can be actually doing practice of meditation of one form or another while you are in line, but no longer waiting. The second practice or the second session really introduced, well, I should go back and say during those short frequent sessions, it introduced 3 different practices that we will have been doing. So the first is taking the mindfulness of breathing. So that was the one that we did then 2 months ago, a deeper look at mindfulness of breathing. And the object of your mindfulness in that practice was the tactile sensations of the breath. And the real benefit of that practice is that when you are focused exclusively on tactile sensations, or it could be any sense input, actually, you are really adding a mute switch to the ruminating mind and the internal chatter. So that is the benefit of that particular practice, is that it can just cut the flow of the conversation in your own mind. Then after that practice, the session last month was called the Dzogchen approach to mindfulness of breathing. So the key in that particular practice was that you are no longer focused on the breath by way of tactile sensations, but now you are knowing the rhythm of the breath. So it's a cognitive experience rather than a tactile experience. But you are really focusing on the rhythm of the breath with peripheral awareness. And the majority of your awareness in that particular practice is the still, spacious quality of awareness itself. So you are able to rest in this stillness while you are aware of the rhythm of the breath, just the coming and going of the breath, and whether it is long or slow. The Buddha's pith advice for doing breath meditation, just simply know whether the rhythm of the breath is long or short. And the key in that particular practice is this concept of stillness and motion. So Dujam Lingpa, who is the founder of this particular lineage that Lama Allen teaches and that he was taught by Gyatso Rinpoche, the key in this system is that you make progress through the stages of shamatha meditation through 4 different stages. And so these are what Dujam Lingpa called the 4 modes of mindfulness. And so the key in this first mode of mindfulness, which is called single-pointed mindfulness, is first of all to notice the difference between stillness and motion. So that's the key, and that was really the key skill that was being taught in that Dzogchen approach to mindfulness of breathing. So predominantly your awareness is still, and you are simultaneously aware of the movement of the rhythm of the breath. So that is a really powerful skill to have. And in that particular practice of the Dzogchen approach to simultaneous, knowing the difference, first of all, between stillness and motion, and then becoming simultaneously aware of stillness and motion, called the unification of stillness and motion. In that practice, it's a very simple movement that we are becoming aware of, which is just the coming and going of the breath, and whether it's long or a short rhythm. So that one could keep you occupied for quite a while, that particular practice. As you really familiarize yourself with knowing the difference between stillness and motion, and that is really key. See that these are different aspects of mind or different experiences of mind. And then today's practice is called taking the mind as the path, or taking aspects of the mind as the path, or other names such as that refer to this. The path and the appearances that arise in the space of the mind are actually the object of our mindfulness. And so this is a more difficult practice, or more challenging, I should say, practice than the Dzogchen approach to mindfulness and breathing, because now this is not the simple coming and going of the breath that is the movement that you are aware of, but it is actually the mental appearances that arise within the space of the mind. And these mental appearances are challenging because you never know what's coming up next. The mind is really just not under our conscious control until it's very well trained. And so not only is it that we don't know what's coming up next, but it's also that the appearances that do come up are often very alluring. And they invite us to, because of their fascinating quality. I mean, these are my appearances after all, appearances of my mind. What could be more fascinating than that? And so these invite us to become fused with them. They invite us to identify ourselves, me, as these thoughts, and to go journeying with them, to lose the stillness of our awareness, and actually for awareness to go in motion with the appearance. So this is the challenge of this particular practice of taking the mind as the path, that can we maintain the stillness of our awareness while we are watching the ebb and flow, the coming and going, the arising, abiding, and dissolving of these mental appearances, or do we go into motion with them? So this path of taking the mind as the path was taught by Padmasambhava as a shamatha practice. And this is interesting to me because with this practice, you can develop the relaxation, the stability, and the clarity that is essential for developing the quiescence of shamatha practice. So by using this ever-changing and compelling parade of appearances in our mind as the object of mindfulness, you can actually develop stillness, of quiescence. And so this is extraordinary, because once you achieve shamatha, then all of the paths open to you, really. And vipassana and cutting through to pristine awareness, all of that becomes possible once you actually achieve shamatha. So through this arising, abiding, and dissolving of mental appearances, we can achieve that stillness of shamatha. But what's really fascinating to me about this particular practice is that this is right on the cusp of vipassana practice as well, because the ever-changing parade of mental appearances also give you an opportunity to observe the nature of these appearances and the nature of the mind that is viewing these appearances. And so even though this is a shamatha practice, and there is no real explicit active investigation going on here, as there is in vipassana practice, the conclusions of your observation are just inescapable. And so this is why this practice is so powerful and can lead to very important life-changing results. I think more than taking other aspects of movement as your object of mindfulness. So the one of the critical things to recognize with this practice is recognizing the primacy of the mind. And so this is a concept, really, or an experience or a realization that the mind is primary, which swims against the stream of contemporary culture and contemporary scientific orthodoxy within the mind sciences anyway. Now, when you examine the tenets of a century of quantum physics, it requires actually the primacy of the mind for contemporary physics, and especially quantum field theory and quantum mechanics, just posit and have been positing for over 100 years now that there would be no matter, there would be no physical phenomena whatsoever without a mind already present to observe and make choices about what to measure. But somehow the cognitive sciences and the mind sciences are still waiting for that revolution to occur. And as Lama Allen points out in very great detail, that the mind sciences, our contemporary mind sciences, are still based on the 18th century physics before the rising of quantum theory. And because of our scientific education, where everything is, the education occurs in these silos of knowledge, that still waiting for that, what has been known for 100 years in quantum theory to become the fundamental understanding of the primacy of the mind in cognitive sciences. So this has been is a cardinal tenet of Buddhism. So in the Ratnamega Sutra, for instance, it states, all phenomena are preceded by the mind. When the mind is comprehended, all phenomena are comprehended. By bringing the mind under control, all things are brought under control. So this gives you a real clear indication of, if you want to change your world, where do you investigate? Where do you apply all of your knowledge and insights and effort? It's in the investigation and the training of the mind. And then Padmasambhava is cited in the third Kamtrul Rinpoche's text that we're studying right now with Lama Karma, the Royal Seal of Mahamudra. The mind is the creator of all samsara and nirvana. Samsara and nirvana are nowhere else apart from the mind. So it doesn't matter, it's not your zip code that is the determination of whether you are in samsara or nirvana. It's not Crestone that is samsara, or Crestone that is more likely nirvana for most of us. And it's not Moffat that is samsara, or Alamosa, or where you came from, where you escaped from. It's not a physical place. It all is the product of your mind, wherever you are. And you can move to the most idyllic location and bring your samsara with you, because that's all that you have to work with is your mind. And then in Kamtrul Rinpoche's commentary, he emphasizes, in short, this is why it is important for us, ourselves, to tame the doer of all, our present mind, which is addicted to thinking, agitated, and excited with all kinds of thoughts. When you do not know how to tame and preserve your mind, and it is hence carried away by distraction, delusion, and forgetfulness, it is the source of all causes for wandering in samsara. If instead your mind is not taken over by distraction, forgetfulness, and delusion, and realizes its own nature, which is nurtured and not forgotten, this itself encompasses the heart of all the teaching and all the roots of the path. So this is really an exhortation to achieve and practice shamatha, because if your mind is distracted and deluded and forgetful, meaning forgetful of what is the object of your mindfulness, you are creating the causes of samsara. And this really indicates the power of shamatha practice also. If you are able to overcome those faults of mind, then you are actually creating the causes of nirvana. So this really is a powerful incentive to practice shamatha and develop the ways to overcome distraction and forgetfulness. So in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen traditions, the recognition of the nature of mind is not really based on reasoning and analysis as it is in some traditions, but it's really based on direct observations, very empirical. And a key to observing the movements of the mind with still awareness is to recognize that awareness illuminates appearances but does not become them. So the quintessential instruction for maintaining this stillness is to sustain the flow of mindfulness without distraction and without grasping. So what this means, to observe the movements of the mind without distraction, means that your mind is not going out to outward appearances. So this is the objects that are appearing within the space of the mind. And with the power of this practice, you can observe as you are becoming confused and wandering with the outward appearances that arise within the space of the mind, that what happens is you're going off with the referent of a thought. So just consider, for instance, or the term mother, your mother. And is this simply a word, or is this simply a mental image that is arising in your mind? Or do you instantly think of the real mother, the one who is the referent of the word? So what typically happens is that our mind goes wandering with what we believe to be the real mother, and we don't recognize that what I am experiencing or what is present to me at this moment is simply a mental appearance. And when we are able to do that, these appearances of outer objects arise, but we recognize them for what they are, that these are just mental appearances. And so we aren't shanghaied by the appearance and go off in this train of associations and wandering in fantasies, thoughts of the past or the future with my mother. And then, so the cardinal advice is to sustain our mindfulness without distraction and without grasping. And without grasping means without identifying with the subjective appearances that arise. We'll notice that in our mental experience, there are not only these objective appearances of things that seem to be independent of me out there, but there are also these experiences of who I am, of moods, of emotions, of definitions of who I am and views of who I am. So are we able to view these also without overlaying some sort of concrete reality on them that just isn't there, and view these also, all of my hopes and fears, my anxieties, my depression, my exaltation, my judgments, all of these seem to be part of who I am, the kind of a flavor of the person behind the camera who is viewing all of these so-called outer appearances as a kind of flavor of the person viewing them. So I am angry, and the person appearing to me is the cause of my anger. Can we recognize that both the person here behind the camera who appears to be anger, that exists in the same way as what is appearing to me to be the cause? They are both just mental appearances. The difference between stillness of awareness and the movement of mental appearances can be readily and very easily observed. If you take this as your shamatha object of mindfulness, recognizing the difference between stillness and movement, you're going to see right away that there is a very different quality to the movement of mental appearances and the still awareness that is observing these appearances. And Dujam Lingpa said in his definition of these four modes of mindfulness that, first of all, what we do in developing single-pointed mindfulness is to recognize the difference between stillness and motion. And then by familiarization of ourselves with this difference between stillness and motion, there is a unification of the two, of stillness and motion, into a single experience. And this unification of the two occurs because you come to recognize that stillness and motion are not two different minds or two different phenomena, that these are two different aspects of a single appearance, of a single phenomena. And the third Kamtrul Rinpoche says again in his text, ultimately, stillness is mind essence, and thoughts are the natural radiance of the mind. Like water and its waves, or the sun and its rays, they are not two. When you consider the still mind as good and the moving mind as bad, although they are not two things, you are grasping at them as such. So this is really powerful advice to us to not value, even though we are cultivating this unification of stillness and motion, and we want have a natural inclination to value stillness over movement. And it can be that we want to banish movement and just rest in stillness. The advice for this practice is not to do that, not to value stillness and motion, because if we are doing that, if we value stillness and we are wishing that our mind would not be in movement, we are deluded by this grasping that they are actually two different minds. Think of the movement as the natural radiance of the mind and the stillness as the essence of the mind, like the sun and its rays. And the unification happens naturally then with that recognition, which sounds again like Vipassana, coming to the aid of your shamatha practice. And also, the third Kamtrul Rinpoche points out here and emphasizes that we shouldn't value longer periods of stillness over shorter periods of stillness. Again, if we're doing that, then this is a grasping onto the difference between stillness and motion. And for as long as it lasts, then we should just rest in this recognition of whether there is stillness, whether there is motion, the difference between stillness and motion, and the unification of stillness and motion. So it is the mindfulness, maintain the mindfulness for as long as it is there, and don't be concerned or don't wish that it would be longer or shorter. And Dujam Lingpa has some very practical, pithy advice for how to achieve the stillness in his text, Buddhahood Without Meditation. He says, if you forcefully suppress the thought process while focusing your mind single-pointedly on such things as a stick or a pebble, then many obsessive thoughts will arise, as if you had blocked an irrigation canal and your body, speech, and mind may become sharply uncomfortable. In that case, loosely relax and watch your thoughts from afar, clearly observing whatever arises. So this is pointing out the problem with striving and trying to insist that your mind be still. And especially if you are working on these this shamatha practice of shamatha with a sign, where you have a physical object in front of you is one sign, a Buddha image or a stick or a stone, and you just insist that this is all that I am focused on. This is all that is filling my perception right now. There is going to be this internal pressure of thoughts that just are waiting to erupt, and like being backed up behind a dam. And the dam is going to be breached at some point, and there's going to be a flood of these mental appearances. So the antidote to that, Yujam Lingpa says, is to relax and just watch these appearances come and go as a herder would watch his yak herd or cattle herd or goat herd from a distant slope. And in some texts, there is really practical advice about how to herd your cattle, in fact, and to not push them to a grazing area, but to let them go to a grazing area and just chill out and relax and don't force where your cattle are grazing, in fact. So that's the attitude that we need to have with the appearances that arise in our mind, is that we are just watching them from a distance and not wishing that they be other than they are. And so in this practice, when we are watching from afar, your introspective awareness, this quality control monitor that is telling you how you're doing. Are you still on your object? Are you still on the object of your breath? Are you still in this spacious knowing of stillness while you are peripherally knowing the rhythm of the breath? The quality control agent, introspective awareness here, is looking for movement of the stillness of your awareness, not the movement of the appearances that are rising in the mind, because all you're going to see is movement there. And so your introspection is really looking at the stillness of your awareness here and going to alert you to the fact that you have become fused and gone wandering with the appearance that has arisen. And so there's a Tibetan phrase that really captures this stability of the stillness of awareness with the question, is awareness holding its own ground? And meaning that, is awareness where you left it, where it is residing, the monarch on its throne, or has it gone off wandering with these mental appearances? And the ironic thing, or maybe surprising thing about awareness holding its own ground, is that it doesn't come from clinging to a spot and saying that this is my readout here and I am going to not move from it. I am like clinging with my toenails to this spot on the ground and I refuse to budge. The image that Lama Allen often uses for this, the relaxed attitude that we need when we're viewing these mental appearances, is that of a kestrel called a sparrowhawk, right? And so it's a small, actually a falcon that has this very unique, not so unique, but a way of flying and hunting where it is able to just rest in the wind and without using its wings at all. It's just surfing like a kayaker surfing a wave. And it is just with a basic, what is called kiting into the wind and navigating the gusts and the change of direction with just a tip of the wing or an adjustment of the tail or whatever. And it's just hovering there in space. Ravens do that also. You see them up, especially with the heavy spring winds that we've had. They just seem to be hovering there in air without flapping their wings. They're just surfing the air currents. So this is the attitude that we should have, this relaxed, just watching appearances come and go, and without this idea that I am clinging to this spot, with maintaining my stillness with effort and with real intensity. So it's the very Dujam Lingpa's advice: relax and take it easy. So in mindfulness of breathing, you let go of thoughts as soon as you detect them, because these are not the object of your mindfulness. The tactile sensations of the breath are your object of mindfulness. But in this practice, you don't release or chase thoughts away, but these are the object of your mindfulness. And so you don't chase them away or make them go. What you do is let them be. And another Tibetan aphorism that captures this is, let your mind be a gracious host in the midst of unruly guests. So just relax and be open and available to whatever arises. In the Tibetan dream practices of dream yoga, as taught by Padmasambhava, there are two different types of dream yoga, or done during two different times of the day. There's the nighttime dream yoga, of course, which really focuses partly, initially anyway, on lucid dreaming. And then once you are able to dream lucidly, you do all kinds of Dharma practices with your lucid awareness in the dream state. So this is nighttime dream yoga, but the one that we're really working on here would be called daytime dream yoga. And so the practice of nighttime dream yoga is to be lucidly aware that you're dreaming while you're in the midst of a dream. And in daytime dream yoga, it's the same practice, really. It's to wake up to the fact that you are dreaming in the waking state. That the difference between what you are experiencing in the daytime and the nighttime, there is a difference, but as Stephen LeBerge, an expert on lucid dreaming, said, the big difference is that in daytime dreaming, we are constrained by the five senses. In nighttime dreaming, you are not. But the quality of the mental appearance is really very similar. And so what we're trying to do is to wake up to the fact that these are mental experiences that are filling our mind right now. Not that I am some unbiased observer of something that truly exists out there independent of me. And this is really captured by the story of the Buddha when he was wandering around India shortly after his enlightenment. And a tracker saw these very unique footprints in the dirt with these Dharma wheels embossed on the soles of the feet, one of the major marks of a Buddha. And so the tracker followed these unusual tracks because he had never seen these before to the Buddha. And he asked the Buddha, "Are you a god?" "No," the Buddha replied. "Are you a reincarnation of a god?" "No," he replied. "Are you a wizard then?" "No." "Well, are you a man?" "Interesting." "No." "So what are you?" the tracker asked, perplexed. "I am awake," the Buddha said. So when we are non-lucidly awake, when we are in the dreaming state, the mental part of our experience of the world and of phenomena really becomes invisible to us. We take things at face value in the waking state, just as we do in the dream state, with the most outlandish appearances arising, like pigs flying, water running uphill, and people that you haven't seen in years, they're right on the pillow with you, etc. We just take that as face value. We don't realize that, oh, this is so crazy. This has to be a dream. But so we want to be able to have that same realization that we are deluded and attributing a concreteness to mental appearances that just aren't there, that doesn't exist. And to be lucidly awake means to watch mental appearances through their entire life cycle. And this is the key that you will know that you are lucidly awake. If you can watch a mental appearance arise, if you can watch it while it is present for some time, and then if you can still be observing it and recognizing it as it dissolves, so the full life cycle of a mental appearance. And if you check your experience in meditation, you will probably find, like most of us, that you are really only aware of the presence of a mental appearance. You're not catching the mental appearance in the instant that it arises, but it's only after it is there for some time that you become aware of it. And then what happens typically is that you go off wandering with the referent of the mental appearance, and you never see it dissolve, because the first mental appearance is followed by a second one, and then a following third one in a train of associations. And then you can be wandering, you can be shanghaied for many minutes without realizing that you actually have left your object of mindfulness. So what we are trying to do is to be present for this entire life cycle and recognize that these are just momentary mental appearances. In this practice, the explicit object of mindfulness is the space of the mind and the mental appearances that arise within that space. And if you are able to be present and observe the arising, the abiding, and then the dissolution of a mental appearance, you may recognize a gap between the dissolution of one mental appearance and the arising of the next. And this gap, what is that? This is the space of the mind in which these mental appearances are arising. And this is the stillness, the spaciousness of the mind that you can recognize very readily in this gap if you can watch the full life cycle of mental appearances. And how long do these mental appearances arise if you don't grasp to them? I think of grasping to mental appearances as putting them on artificial life support or on life support. And, we keep them around by constantly ruminating about them and fusing with them. But if we are able to just watch these appearances arise, abide, and dissolve, how long do they last? You can really observe it. It can be very brief. Classic texts in Buddhism, probably the Abhidharmakosha, says that there are, in a finger snap, there are 64 karmic ripenings. So very, very brief. And as I recall from my reading in cognitive science, it's said that there are what's called an ascertaining moment of cognition. The briefest ascertaining moment of cognition is 50 milliseconds for an untrained person. So that's very, very brief. So that would be 20 per second, right? No. Yeah. So 5/100ths of a second So 20 ascertaining moments of cognition. They're both basically pointing out that these moments of cognition can be very brief. And this is part of what a quality that we can develop in our shamatha practice is what Lama Allen calls temporal vividness. So there are two types of vividness that as you progress through the path of shamatha that you can develop. One is Lama Allen calls qualitative vividness, meaning that you can begin to experience sensations. This would be especially apt for tactile sensations of the breath. You can begin to experience sensations that you never could feel before, such as maybe the tactile sensations of the breath in the palm of your hand or something like that, or that were typically below the threshold of your awareness. So as your mind becomes more and more still and stable and clarity increases, this results in this other kind of clarity on steroids, which is vividness. And the vividness then can be for tactile sensations, or it can be temporal also, meaning that you can become aware of things that were too brief, arising too briefly for you to recognize before. So you can begin to, when you were just experiencing the flow of mental appearances as a torrent of water flowing off a mountainside, or like you're standing under a waterfall or something like that. That's the initial experiences of the mind when you're experiencing shamatha. It's just uninterrupted torrent. And as you progress, then the torrent begins to slow down until it may become more like a dripping faucet, just and you can actually see that these are discrete moments, and there's a gap between one drip and the next. So this is achieved through this qualitative vividness. And part of the power of these gaps is that you can really have a direct experience then of the stillness, spaciousness of the space of the mind in which these appearances are arising, abiding, and dissolving. Lama Allen also emphasizes that in doing this practice, it's very important to recognize the difference between thinking a thought and a thought arising. If a thought arises, it has no owner. It is just an appearance arising, but it's not my thought. And if I recognize it as an arising rather than my thought, or I think the thought, then there is less chance that I will be fused with it and use this thought to identify who I am. But it just comes and goes because I'm not attached to it as my thought. And if you are able to make this distinction between thinking a thought and a thought arising, then this allows for a radical impartiality to the appearances that are arising. If it's not my thought, after all, and it's just a thought arising, then I don't have to modify it. I don't have to be guilty thinking this thought. I don't have to crave more of this thought. It's just an appearance that arises without my thinking it. And so there's no preference that it stay or that it go. And this radical impartiality can be much more challenging with the subjective mental appearances rather than the objective mental appearances. So try to develop this skill of this radical impartiality with the objective appearances that arise. And then after you're comfortable and familiar with that, apply that also to the subjective appearances that arise, because the subjective appearances are the ones that feel like they are me. I am angry. I am depressed. I am joyful. I am so happy today. And it just feels like this is a quality of who I am. But can you also have the radical impartiality for these thoughts also of the subjective appearance and not crave them or not wish that they would go and leave me alone for once? And so the appearance is not the problem. It's not the fact that an appearance has arisen that creates mental afflictions for us or that causes us to be unhappy or happy or exultant. It is the identification with the appearance of anger, anxiety, depression, etc., as me that is the problem. And if you are not grasping to these thoughts, then you can't identify with them. So whatever arises, whether it be happy, whether it be unhappy, just let it be. And before we go into our meditation, this is really beautifully expressed by a poem of Rumi called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Well, let's see if we can maintain that attitude of welcoming as we do our meditation practice of taking the mind as the path. So find a comfortable position that can be seated on a cushion on the floor, that can be seated in a chair, that can be lying in the supine position of Shavasana, that can be standing as well, if you're feeling really dull. This will be a 24-minute session, a true Ghatika. Begin with just checking your motivation for a moment. And the greater your motivation, the greater the impact and the greater result possible. Could this particular session right here lead you to be an example for how others can achieve shamatha, eliminate suffering, and achieve all the highest potential of this human life? Begin by settling the body in its natural state. This is the state of relaxed ease, stillness, and vigilant attention. If you feel a tension or even pain in your body, Let your breath be drawn to it as if it were breathing, and release that tension on the exhalation into space. Your posture is really a key to the vigilance of observing what comes later. So if you're feeling dull, just check your posture to see if you're slumping and sit erect with a straight spine. And to settle the breath in its natural state, surrender all control of the breath and let the body breathe itself. As we investigated last session, this may lead to a short, shallow rhythm. But don't try to force that. Just let it arise as you relax more and more deeply with each exhalation. And as you relax more and more deeply, try to maintain the clarity that you begin your meditation with. Don't give in to the association of deep relaxation with drowsiness. Let your eyes be gently open. Just resting your gaze vacantly in space. And you can use this gaze as an antidote to distraction by lowering your gaze, and an antidote to laxity by raising your gaze. And then settle the mind in its natural state. This is the mind of the present moment, without wandering off to thoughts of the future or the past. Clear and spacious, luminous and knowing. And now direct your attention single-pointedly to the space of the mind. This is the space in which thoughts, mental images, and other mental events arise, are present for some time, and then self-release. You'll know your awareness is resting in this space of the mind if, as soon as the thought arises, you notice it. You recognize it immediately. Because you're looking right where this mental appearance arises, the space of the mind. Observe whatever arises in this space of the mind. Thoughts, images, emotions, memories, whatever it is, observe them as if you were a herder on a hill watching your herd of yak grazing contentedly, without grasping to them, without wishing that they be different. Whatever arises, simply let it be. Recognize the difference between the stillness of your awareness and the movement of appearances that arise there in that space of the mind. Try to be present for the entire life cycle of a mental appearance. In the first instant that it arises, for as long as it is present. And then as it self-releases, Is there a gap between the dissolving of one appearance and the arising of the next? What is this gap? If you are resting in stillness, there will be no preference at the movement come or that it go, at a particular appearance of pleasure, stay, or that something uncomfortable, go and never come back. Can you have this radical impartiality for the subjective appearances also? The appearances that seem to be me, do they have any concrete existence other than being a mental appearance? Whatever subjective appearance arises, can you simply witness it without clinging to it or feeling aversion for it? If your still awareness is set in motion by grasping to one of these appearances and going wandering with it, as soon as you discover that, release your grasp on the distracting object. Rejoice, ah, I am lucid again. Return to that stillness and relax ever more deeply on the next exhalation. Are there any questions about what we covered or about your experience in meditation? Yes. Uh, what is your name again? So Karen here in our audience in Crestone observed that for most of her experience there, it was a parade of images, of visual images, I take it, rather than thoughts. Yeah. So it would probably be different next session. Or is that your specialty? Are you very visual person? Are you very visual person? Yeah. So the the practice is really the same, regardless of what it is in this parade of appearances. And I like that the term appearances is very generic and it covers everything from mental appearances, emotion, visual appearances, auditory. We could definitely have an, especially right before lunch, we might be visualizing, we might be smelling something appealing. And was there a gap between these visual appearances? She said that there was a gap between some appearances and it was brief. Are there any other questions from our online audience?
Seems there's a lot of connectivity between the appearances that arise, if they're related to each other.
That, so let's see, do I need to repeat that? Yeah, so one of the online participants observed that there seemed to be a lot of connection between the thoughts or mental appearances. And I think that that's very common as what I think of as a train of association, and so that um, there can be even though they might be distinct appearances, uh, the arising of one appearance, especially if there is some grasping to it, that it can kind of predispose you to a furthering of the thought or something of in a similar vein anyway.
There's a question from James. He asked, I often find myself struggling to keep my eyes slightly open. Not necessarily because I'm tired and we're drifting, I just roll with it. But is there a specific reason we don't just close our eyes?
So the question was, why do we meditate with our eyes open? And as one Tibetan Lama put it, if we become accustomed to meditating with our eyes closed, we will become habituated, I guess, to the thought that I can only meditate with my eyes closed. And most of our experience throughout the day, our eyes are not closed. So that's one, that it just helps you to recognize that you can meditate while you're in the checkout line. Also, it is really meditating with your eyes open is a support for clarity. And also, it if your eyes are open, you can elevate and lower your gaze as you experience either excitation or drowsiness. So that is a experiment with that, because that is a really powerful and immediate antidote to either laxity or excitation. Yes.
I find that oftentimes, like it feels like awareness is submerging into a kind of dream state. Like it has the feeling of like when you're in a dream and it's like, oh yeah, of course that's happening and that's happening. And sometimes once that gets going, it's hard to kind of like lift back up into recognition, if that makes sense.
It definitely does.
If I raise my gaze, it goes on, and I'm wondering if you have any other recommendations for that.
Yeah. So Claire here in our audience observed that the stillness of awareness can become what sounds like somewhat lax, and that begin to feel like it's a dream state. So that is a very classic and common issue with laxity. So the issue with laxity is that your mindfulness isn't energized, and so it can lead to that dreamlike appearances. And what's interesting to me is that, and I have seen this described by cognitive scientists that who are familiar with meditation, that one thing that really characterizes that drift towards the dream state with that kind of laxity is that you don't really enter a dreaming like REM state, but that you are experiencing what are called hypnagogic images. And so these are often very brief and random, that there's no kind of narrative like there is in a dream. And this particular author wrote that one of the things that characterizes those hypnagogic images is, for one, how brief they are, how disconnected they can be and random, and that there typically is no sense of I as the one that this is experiencing this. Very different. So Claire says exactly. Yeah, so that is a precursor of falling asleep. And so Claire also asked, is there any advice about that, to do that? So one of the things that I find very helpful so first of all, I guess I should say that when you are experiencing or practicing this stillness of awareness, it's very common to, because our association is when the mind is not occupied and stimulated, that it's time for sleep. So we just have that habit of associating lack of stimulation with sleepy time. So when you get to that period of, and this is actually a subtle dullness where you aren't losing your object, but it's just not bright and vivid. And it's said to be the most, for advanced meditators, the most difficult obstacle or meditation fault to overcome is this subtle laxity where you're still focused on your object, but it is not bright and vivid. The kind of clarity becomes super energized when you feel this vividness. And it's an absence of that vividness, actually, that is the subtle dullness. So when I get to or experience something like that, I remember the advice of Jason Kappa, who said that one of the powerful antidotes, because we're always looking for antidotes to excitation or dullness, is to shift your practice, can be even briefly, from shamatha to vipassana. And so the shamatha is going to really support stillness. but it can lead to that laxity because the mind isn't stimulated. And the parade of appearances may slow down and you just begin to space out. And so, especially with the stochastic images, shift to just a moment of vipassana and really focus on the nature of these appearances. And that can just be this moment of bright intensity and clarity. And so you can just practice and experiment, play with that shifting, noticing what is the fault. So is it distraction? So if it's distraction, then shamatha is the antidote to that. And if it's laxity, just shift to a moment of recognizing the nature of these appearances, or ask a simple question like, is this me? Or something like that. You just anything like that can just shock you out of that laxity.
One comment from Clara, which says, I struggle with the notion of witnessing subjective impulses, which seems to imply an act of perception. For me, it's more an act of knowing, which is, however, heavily reliant on conceptualization rather than mental perception. It makes me think that my emotions are more like conceptual constructs rather than appearances.
So the comment from Clara was that the appearances that she's experiencing, especially emotions, seem to be more mental constructs than perceptions. Is that the gist of it? So that really is the difference between objective and mental appearances, is that the objective appearances can be an appearance of a banana, the visual image of your mother, or a parade of visual appearances. And then the subjective appearances, they don't seem to be out there in front of the camera, but it seems to be me, my state of awareness or emotional state or mood or who I am, a quality of who I am behind the camera, so that it doesn't appear out there, but it seems to be more of a quality of awareness itself. And then, so the question then is that anything other than another mental appearance? And that's just something to meditate on. Okay. Well, just one more comment then before we wrap up, about a little boosterism. This practice I just love, and it is so useful and so applicable in our daily lives, because we can, your friends will really appreciate it. Your friends and family and partners and associates, anybody that you deal with, will really appreciate the fact that you're watching these appearances arise, abide, and dissolve, rather than taking them to be real. So the question comes up often in Buddhism: why do we suffer? And there are slightly different answers that depend on the context in which that question is asked. But in this context, a very useful answer is that we grasp to I and mine in that which is not I and mine. And meaning that I am my body, for instance. And so when we get sick or we have some sort of physical problem, some disease, that is, I am sick, I am diseased, or whatever, rather than that this is just an appearance, simply another mental appearance. Or I am my mind. That's the, as we get older, it's easier and easier to say, no, I am not my body. I don't recognize that person in the mirror. That's not me. But I am my mind. So I'm a lot more willing to say that as I grow older. So I still have a youthful mind. I know that. Right? So why do we suffer? We grasp to I and mine in that which is not I or mine. And is the mind also me? And these can be just interesting thoughts or conceptualizations or speculations or great reading, or they can become your experience through meditation. And if you watch these appearances of I and mine come and go, this is where how shamatha verges on vipassana. The conclusions are inescapable, that these are just temporary mental appearances that have arisen, abide for some time, and dissolve again. And so the freedom that this allows you to not be limited by subjective appearances of who I am, objective appearances of my body as who I am. This is truly liberating. And then I think it's worth a moment here to talk about another very useful application in our emotional regulation. Paul Ekman, who is the founder, or at least a very seminal figure in the field of affective psychology, collaborated with Alan Wallace at the request of the Dalai Lama to create this program called Cultivating Emotional Balance. And I did the training for that. I'm a certified teacher in that program. And one of the things that really intrigued me in Paul Ekman's contribution to this program was how ephemeral emotions really are. How long do emotions last? Moments. Yeah, moments. The longest he posited, I think, was anger, which lasts a couple of minutes, something like that. But others emotions of the 7 that he cataloged as being universal last for a number of seconds or 30 seconds, something like that. So what is it then that creates problems with emotions? Why do they seem to last? Why do they seem to become our specialty? How can they become moods? How does one emotional experience, or episode as he calls it, how does it seem to last all afternoon? It's through rumination. So the initial emotion lasts, let's just say 30 seconds. And then it's important what happens after that. We just continue to re-trigger the emotion by ruminating, by thinking about it. Our therapist is nodding yes. This is and you can, so can you observe this happening? If you decide that I really don't want to be angry, or I don't want to be depressed, or I don't want to be disappointed, or whatever the emotion is, can you just watch the re-triggering that happens through the rumination between emotional episodes that last 30 seconds, and then add another 30 seconds and another 30 seconds, and so on. And so Ekman described in the initial response to our emotional arising that there is a gap between the spark and the flame. So there will be a triggering of an emotional episode that has to do with your emotional alert database. But so there is a triggering of the emotion, and then between the triggering and the acting out of the emotional program, really that is more or less on autopilot for a time, that there is a gap between the spark and the flame. And the way to intervene in these emotions, especially ones that are unwelcome and are your particular specialty, is to recognize the gap between the spark and the flame and bring awareness to it. Because that is what then gives you choice about whether you want to act on this emotion, display it, or just to let it be. So anyway, this particular practice of taking the mind as the path has so many applications in our daily life. And we'll get along better with people, we'll have a better relationship with ourselves, recognize our own emptiness, and it will set us up for greater realizations along the path. So thank you, Prestonians, for being here today. Thank you, all of our friends online from around the world, in whatever time you are with us. And I hope that this has been of some benefit to you.